Hello, everybody. We will get started in about 30 seconds to 1 minute, so everybody can get seated and watch the video feed live. So talk to you in a bit. Hello, everybody. My name is Alexander Sack. I hope you enjoy this FOSS 2022 conference so far. You will have a very good time with us here. Today, I want to talk about how distributions need to change in order to make the free and open source software movement more successful for embedded Linux. I'm one of the co-founders of Pentacore, and we are naturally trying to invent Linux core technology that exactly achieves that, makes the life of the embedded Linux author more convenient and more easy to use. Before going into the details, what the problems are for Linux embedded, let's take a moment and celebrate what Linux distros have achieved so far. Linux distros, for me, who has been over 2 decades working with 4 distributions, has succeeded one of the most important elements that the free and open source software movement needed. It managed to make things easy that are hard. What do I mean by that? I mean, today we do not appreciate the amount of work and knowledge and discipline that has flown in the last 2 or 3 decades into the movement of distributions to ensure that we can deliver a sound, well-integrated, and high-quality software stack purely made out of free and open source software centered around the Linux kernel. When I started off working with distributions and getting exposed to them, I was at awe about the fact that there could be, back then, the Debian project, a project of loosely coupled engineers across all over the globe, that there could be such a project that does that as their spare time and delivers something that was so easy to install, so hard to break, and so easy to keep up with security fixes and stability updates there. It was truly inspiring back then for me, and one of the main reasons why I actually worked hard to get into the Linux distributions and participate there and help on making everything better for everyone. And I think Linux distros are still that, right? They are still there to make things easy that are in the end hard. Right? Software is complex, software is complicated, and distributions, those are the melting pot where all those software pieces developed by so many independent people come together and need to be made work. And the distribution itself there is, as this melting block, really the integration bed where all the FOSS ecosystem usually comes together and gets the place where they together can stabilize, can mature, can reach the level of product-grade quality and stability together as a whole. And not only does this happen inside of the distribution, no, it happens as if in a feedback loop with the greater free and open software community. By distros taking what you have developed in your individual component, trying to integrate it, finding bugs, integration bugs, how this component worked with that, but not with that, and feeding back this information or even the fixes to the upstream projects. We have achieved over time that nowadays, if you want to start a new distribution from scratch, it is quite easy. Most of the software is building nicely, especially if you're going for the mainstream architectures like x86 and so on. And the work that was done there is so essential to so many ideas and building blocks out there that are so successful also on the commercial level that I think we have to appreciate that and also applaud the Linux distribution movement for achieving that. There's one other aspect that was always very important for me when it came to distributions, and it was always this idealistic view that the small guy can actually do stuff that usually only the big guys can do. Part of that is being part of this community, develop small pieces or make a custom image remix of a distribution that delivers a specific user experience to their customers. All those things without the distributions would have been infinitely hard for small guys to do. Right? And with distributions, that became easy. And also, distributions were allowing the small guys as well as the big guys to do their things better. Now, so what is my point about Linux and embedded world? And I believe, since I've been moving over from the mainline desktop server world distribution more into the embedded world, I felt like there is something missing. Right? There is some problems in that space, and I still feel there is a big gap of things that are not getting delivered by the distributions that in the end help to keep the dinosaurs around that you can see here, right? There are big companies still in the game with Linux and embedded that make the proprietary operating system around Linux, that they sell it and they force it down the users of their chipsets. So they get proper support and they get proper commercial backing and so on. Now, the problem is not only that there are dinosaurs around, of course, if there are dinosaurs around, because that kind of stands already for the fact that that kind of ecosystem has not matured enough to make those dinosaurs go extinct. It is not only the fact that they are still around that there is a problem, but it's also the problem if you have dinosaurs around and you're a human, like a small guy that wants to do something in that ecosystem, it is very difficult. Right? You go out into the field, you want to pitch a great idea to something, there will always be those dinosaurs around that try to eat you, come in with unfair ways of doing things. And it's not natural that this happens, right? And the reason why this happens, we have to look at later. So, and the price of those dinosaurs being around is that in 2022 on Linux and embedded, we are still not at a point where the product makers can be small, that you can be just a small team making a great embedded product from tip to tail, making the idea, making the initial prototypes, putting that into production, ensuring you get hardware for that thing, great hardware support, and shipping it to masses or to potentially millions of users out there without having to hire a huge team. That is the vision for me that distributions should care for and cater for, that we can have the small guys doing amazing Linux embedded products by using the Linux embedded distributions. And obviously, because we didn't get our act together on that front, and we do not have very good Linux embedded distributions that you can just take and use for making products, the whole red tail of problems that we know about comes along with that. We get security hazards, big maintenance mess, and of course, the dinosaurs are still roaming the world and will continue to roam the world until we have, as an open source community, managed to push them out by delivering the requirements of that specific segment, so they have no chance to compete anymore. And no, Ubuntu, Red Hat, and our friends from Yocto, there is no real solution yet for the Linux embedded ecosystems. I know everybody is trying their best and so on, but I want to put out a few ideas that I think in 2021 too are well overdue to get solved and worked on. And here they are. So why are those dinosaurs still around? Right? They're around because from the beginning, the Linux embedded world is not as straightforward when it comes to hardware support as the desktop or server world, where you just had a nice standardized BIOS-driven Intel architecture, and you could just make a single platform that works for everything. The product-grade hardware support is key, and this is what is missing all the time. If we had product-grade hardware support for the majority of hardware chipsets out there that you can pick and choose from and have that hardware support properly supported in the distributions, I'm sure the dinosaurs wouldn't be around anymore at this point. But rather, they would come along and work together with us as a free and open source community to make great products centered around our distributions. And alongside the hardware story, we also have the middleware story, right? I mean, middleware is kind of hardware, right? But it is actually the bridge from the hardware to the application. Right? There are middleware stacks in the Linux ecosystem for almost anything, right? out there, anything hardware. But do they work? Are they fit for purpose for making a product? That is the big question. And from what I experience, when I go out in the field and work with product makers, I don't see that's the case. They are all close. But the choice, which middleware to use and which middleware actually works on a certain set of hardware support, that is all up to the product makers. And the product makers shouldn't even have to use that, right? So hardware support, middleware support. We get those things right in the distributions. Then we will figure out how to get rid of the dinosaurs and ensure that the Linux embedded ecosystem will become as nice and as beautiful to work with as we see that in the cloud, in the server space, for instance. By the way, the hardware support is also one of those items that still is kind of plaguing the Linux on the desktop movement, right? They've come very far, and hardware manufacturers like NVIDIA and so on, they try their best to support their graphics chipset properly in distributions. But it's still too hard for them to do, right? And it's still very hard for anybody who is innovating on hardware to know how you best get your support into the distribution early rather than waiting until something bubbles down from mainlining this stuff into the Linux kernel. Now, beyond hardware support, I mean, if that would be all, that would be great, right? You could just focus on that. But beyond hardware support, there's more to it. Right? There's also a bit of a disconnect and mindset problem in the distributions that I know exists because I was part of the distributions. And that is actually the idea of having everything in your distribution bubble under control and having that idea manifested into your processes, into your practices, and into your policies that make it very hard for anybody who's trying to be a downstream of you, right? Now, if you want to be a distro downstream, it might be worse for you to invest into making your own build farm, your own sync jobs, to build all the binaries from scratch in your own little archive. Let's say if you're a mint, you can do that, right? Makes sense. You're a distribution, so put some investment in there and do it. But if you're a product maker, a small team of 2, 3, 4, 5 folks that try to make an innovative product and put it to market, that is not an option for you, and it's not a choice, right? You cannot just fork the whole Ubuntu archive or the Alpine archive and get going with it, right? And be happy about it, right? And fork it. But you still need to fork, right? You will need to fork. You need to fork for the applications. You need to fork for the BSP and the hardware support. You will need to fork for the middleware. You will need to fork and do changes to the tooling and the management protocols and so on in order to get your job done. And this will not go away. You will put new types of applications and payloads on software stacks that might hopefully, once we have a great selection of middleware stacks available, be very close to what was tested and validated. But there will still be those this code paths that accidentally get triggered only by you. And this will cause a mess for you. And now if you manage, let's assume we have figured that out as well. We have brought the downstream maintenance in line with everyone and everybody's happy. They can fork stuff, they can maintain it efficiently, they can leech on your security updates, on your stability updates, so a small team can really do an amazing product based on the distributions. Then what then? There are still topics left that nobody is at the moment trying to think holistically in the distributions about. What do I do? How do I put it through factory? How do I make an OTA solution? How do I do a management solution and secure boot? As examples, but there are many more. So the bottom line is distros, we have to make things much easier still for many important dimensions of making Linux embedded product. If we do not do that, the dinosaurs will be around and anything will be infinitely harder because we have those guys sitting in the same room, right? When we try to convince some customer to invest in the right direction to help us drive free and open source software forward. Because if they are there, they will have always good arguments why we're not close enough. Let's fix those gaps. And all of those dinosaurs will come along and will work with the open source software ecosystem more efficiently. And that is basically the bottom line. I mean, how do we make those dinosaurs go extinct? And just to repeat and bring some more perspectives and ideas into this into this whole picture that I'm trying to present here, the key is, again, enable a board support ecosystem. Really, that is important for distributions. If you're a distribution and you think about at the moment, what are you doing to allow the community to come together and offer product-grade board support for your distribution? What is the answer? Do you have that? I suspect no. I mean, there might be some that say, yeah, actually, we have that, like on the Octa side and so on. But if you go for the binary distributions that are also trying to make inroads into the embedded ecosystem right now with IoT, edge gateways, and so on, are you able to give those guys that have the knowledge to make product-grade broad support for one of the millions different options out there, do they have the ability to offer that to your users or not? I don't think so. And I think that requires a big mindset change on the distributions and also on the process and how actually quality gating of contributions from third parties has been done, right? Because if you cannot mobilize kind of a decentralized approach where many small guys can offer product-grade hardware support, where people that consume it understand what works and what doesn't work, then the dinosaurs will not go away. Those guys that built the chipsets, they will always be there and say, our chips are fully supported, they're working great, use our software on top of that Linux kernel. And to bring in this idea, to drive it to go a bit further in this idea, how do we get this broad support ecosystem? I want to talk about the middleware stack choices because I think that is key. If you think about the distribution, a normal distribution, they usually try to optimize the whole stack around one or two products, complete product stacks like the Linux desktop or the server or the container engine X, right? Those product stacks are the ones that drive what are considered release critical bugs and what gets the attention of the developers, right? So the key of making and stabilizing middleware and software in general in the distribution is about defining those stacks that need to work. And my proposal here is the biggest way or the best way we can really help the diverse Linux embedded ecosystem where there are so many different peripherals and so many different application types where you cannot just say there's a single product stack that we stabilize and then everybody is happy, is to rather go one step down and say, we define a set of middleware stack choices that then in the distribution we rally around and stabilize so that people can experience them in the best and most stabilized manner. And by the way, if we had those middleware stack choices, we can also use these to actually define the gates for third-party board support, right? If third-party board support supports middleware stack X and Y and Z, we can put certification stamps on them and then say, okay, if you do that, plus you do some certain support and security promises, we can make you a top-tier BSP for our distribution. I like that idea a lot. The more I've been thinking about it when I prepared this talk, and I think that is the key to it. Let's define middleware stack choices. They're concrete, that are opinionated, that have a great understanding of what features are supported and have a good set of example applications running on top. And through that middleware stack choices, we can ensure that the board support ecosystem can more effectively produce bits and pieces that are actually meeting the standards we are looking for. And then just to go down the other points, you can read it by yourself. I think it's key that we really rethink what tooling we offer product makers to be downstream. How do you derive something? How do you patch something? How do you maintain that? How do you still consume our security and stability updates? If you do not have that, it's completely impossible to make a product, right? So please, let's think about that and let's paint out that picture and make that happy and make that so that people can do that efficiently with a small team. And similar, these other tooling and management items need to be solved. Right? Let's find common and standardized ways to do an install across distros. Let's find common and standardized ways across distributions to get deployment, over-the-air updates, factory process, and secure boot done and dusted. Right? So, before we end this talk, I hope I already gave you a good idea on what I think needs to be done. I just want to talk a few minutes about Pentacore and what we do, hoping to help this movement or this way of rethinking how distributions can help the Linux embedded ecosystem. As you got from the talk before, I think the centerpiece of all of that is the BSP. It needs to be distro agnostic, because if you want to tell anybody to make a serious effort to put money, resources into providing a product grade board support package for software, you need to tell them what is the potential market you can reach with it. And if you are always trying to make everything different in all those distributions on the BSP levels, it will be very hard to convince them to invest in one or the other direction, right? And to do that seriously and in a lasting fashion. So we need to come up with a packaging and sharing mechanism that is distro agnostic for the kernel, for the modules, for the firmware, for the DTBs, so that everybody can produce a single output. And we have tried to define a first shot in doing such a packaging format. Not everybody will like it, but I would love if some of you would take a look, talk to us, and we can iterate on improving that so it's more suitable for everyone if you like it. Because we are not a distribution, right? Not a real distribution. We really just are into core technology that hopes to facilitate the change that I'm talking about, right? Also, we have an open source place to actually host and share those BSPs and the packaging format, which is called the Pentacore Hub. It's a piece of open source software that anybody can install and run, and you can use it a bit more like GitHub to push and place stuff and so on out. And it has lots of potential, I believe, for being a central protocol for sharing these BSPs in a distribution agnostic fashion. Also there again, I mean, nothing is set in stone from our side, but I mean, if people would like to take a look, we would be happy to talk about that more. Last but not least, we have a Pentavisor.io platform, which is a no OS and no distribution platform that allows you to put together an embedded Linux experience from just DBSPs and containers, right? And I believe this would be a great test bed for doing the stabilization and the testing and the validation of the middleware stacks I'm talking about, because it removes all the distro-specific things underneath it at this moment. And you can then later reuse those middleware stacks in your distribution context without having them initially being biased in one way or another. For all of that, we have invented a state format that allows you to easily share those bits and pieces like middleware applications and BSP over the wire. And I think it could be very useful for achieving what I was talking to here. But if not, that's also fine. Let's talk about it, and if you're interested, let's improve it. So thanks for listening so far. I hope you enjoyed this talk a bit. Hope it provoked a few thoughts on your side, and you have some questions afterwards. So reach out to me anytime. If you want to learn more about what we are doing, you can find our no OS platform for running containerized embedded systems on Pentavisor.io. Thank you so much. Have fun on the rest of the day, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference as well. Perfect. 4 more seconds. Hey guys, thanks for listening in. I think we have a bit more time now for discussion than I thought. I thought it was actually 30 minutes, not so. Let's use that time and chat, I guess. Also, a big shout out to everybody I already know. Seems like lots of dinosaurs, including me, are still around in this ecosystem. So, yeah, let's take a look. I'm trying to be in the chat room myself. Oh, wait a second. That's a bad idea to go to the chat room where your voice is then being heard, and you get a feedback loop. Anyway, so let's look at the questions. Seems a couple of those have popped up over the time. So let me see which one makes sense to look at first. So let's start with the question that came up first, because that was in a chronological order also when I chatted about this. I think that was Ben Cotton asking, what can distros do to reach product grade hardware support when hardware vendors aren't motivated to work with the community? Yeah, look, I mean, this is, in the end, this is a chicken egg problem, obviously, right? But when I mean, I've been working in distros and especially in Ubuntu quite a lot, and I never had the feeling that the idea of hardware support manufacturers, smaller or bigger guys, of trying to be inside of the distro and reaching those users and the developers was always a hard sell, right? There was no hard sell in that point. So there was a willingness to at least try to get in the distribution. So I think that is already a prerequisite. If people want to get into a distribution, you already can start trying to think, why are they not in a distribution, and try to make that life maybe better or easier, right? Initially, there will not be like huge amount of products being made from a distribution, so maybe the big guys will take a while to come along, but it needs to be a step-by-step process, right? So the first problem is that how can you let those guys actually into your distribution, right? How can you, as a distribution manufacturer, put the stamp on it and say, this is good for my distribution, I'm happy to let them in, and I'm happy that users can do that. And this is all about fixing the processes and the policies in a way that you can do that without feeling bad about them being part of your distribution, right? So, and that's where I had the idea to say, look, if you basically, as a distribution, or we as best as a FOSS community, we define a set of key middleware stacks, and you have the ability to say, in order to get in, these middleware stacks, they need to be properly sorted. And during your release process, during the stabilization, you will then have a chance to lock those guys out that haven't made it, right? So if somebody is claiming, I'm supporting the Pulse audio stack very nicely and so on, then the middleware stack, then you need to, of course, have a reference stack that everybody's using for that Pulse audio. And then you can basically say, okay, if you make it, you can put your kernel in for your boards, and you support only Pulse audio, right? And then they can claim more and more of those middleware stacks that they support. And in this way, at least you have a way to control and to slowly increase the requirement to get into your distributions, right? Or to be part, to get a stamp that you are certified for running on that distribution. Of course, if you make it infinitely hard at the beginning, nobody will join. And also you have to remember that at the beginning, it will not be the chip manufacturers themselves probably doing that, but it will be the small guys. They say, okay, I want to be able to offer maybe hardware support for this nice IMX-based platform over this nice Raspberry Pi platform. And by offering a way that you can actually crowdsource hardware support in a way that it does not diminish your quality completely, you will be able to show examples how great it can work. And then eventually the commercial guys will also come and will start working with you. I'm 100% sure, right? This is how it always happens. First, somebody from the community steps in, takes over packaging application X, shows the world how great it is, how many users are coming to the distributions, and then suddenly the commercial guys will come along. They will have enough justification for their bosses to justify the budget and so on to do it. But the essential part is really to ensure that there is a process that works, that third parties can contribute hardware support to your distributions, and that there is also a process that they can update it, of course, and offer security support and stability support in one way or another. And then that you also can tell the users what is the quality of this thing, right? Certification, badging, putting badges on them so people understand, okay, this is a BSP backed by this person. It supports these 3 middleware stacks maybe, and it has a promise to do updates ABC, right? Something like that would be my idea. It's like something we have to find out together in the end. Hope that answers the question a bit. Also, I hope my talk was after the question a bit clear about this one. Okay. So the second one here, do you have any example that this strategy works in practice? You seem to be effectively saying community distros should force hardware giants to collaborate with them rather than cheat. But that sounds outlandish, like grass should fight back to dinosaurs to avoid being eaten. Well, I think the best examples where we can see that this works is actually in the segments where it worked, right? So if you look at the server space or you look at the desktop space, I mean, you see that it can work, right, in one way or another. It's not like a complete crazy idea to say if there are tools and means to really do board support and you can effectively contribute them to a certain distribution and make your board work, that people will not switch to that, right? It will be a slow process, right? But if you do not start and you have no hardware support and you do not offer the ability that third parties can actually do the supporting and the security updates and be the ones that actually stand in with their name as part in your distribution to have that hardware support, you will never get there anyway, right? Because as long as the hardware support cannot be there, everybody who has the hardware support can sell their shit into the market, and that will win, right? Because in the end, you need to pick hardware, and then you need to pick whatever works there. And yes, as I said, I mean, look at the desktops and servers. I mean, these are examples where it worked, right? It took a while, a long time, right, to take over the world, but in the end, they're coming along, right? People are getting it, and they start to contribute their hardware support. They think more about that, and try to make it work in the mainline kernel, right? But in the mainline kernel, it's usually easier to do than in a BSP type of kernel. Do you think we can abandon BSPs for good and just decouple distros from firmware like on x86? Well, that's the idea, right? In the end, but I think it's not realistic that this will happen very soon. And so I think one thing would be very important. I mean, we work a lot with containers, right? And we try to think of the BSP and the no-host OS that we have really a kind of, that's more the firmware, and it is always should be the same everywhere, very minimal, doing nothing but the hardware enablement. But then you will have to add stuff on top of it, like applications and middleware and so on. But they are still tightly connected. So I think trying to get rid of it will really require a very sophisticated middleware, so that you can, as a Linux embedded engineer, you really can use all the peripherals and all the hardware that is on the board for you to get going, right? And only then you will be able to really try to decouple the distros completely, right? But I mean, I'm not sure exactly if you talk about UEFI and so on. I mean, these things exist for ARM as well, but I think I think that is not the biggest problem, right? The bootloader and bringing up the board, those are nasty things, right? But in the end, we will have device trees. We will not have a full-fledged BIOS on those things, type of thing. So I think those will not go away. It's all about making the Linux kernel that exists and is available and offers you the hardware support to make that great, right? And that this comes with guarantees and proper support for certain middleware stacks that you as an application or a distro manufacturer then can use and rely on. That it gives you the ability to do that. Yeah. Cool. Let's see. Certain middleware stack. Yeah, sorry, I was trying to just look at the distro room. For me, the delay is a bit awkward. So it seems like it's a bit delayed there. Yeah. So for Pentavisor, yes, we will soon announce a couple of webinars. Which traditionally we have not done that so much, but I think the more requests we get for such things, the more likely it is we are doing, and we have recently talked about that. So maybe stay on our LinkedIn profile and Twitter, and you will get such information there from us. Not done that so such things, the more likely it is we're doing, and we have recently talked. So Sigmund, to your question, isn't the BSP really just the kernel? The rest is usually not on the critical path. That depends how you see it, right? In the end, so we believe in Pentavisor that in the end, if you look at what happened with the cloud, we really need to get to a point where all the devices out there kind of have the same software lifecycle system running, is our opinion. So that something coming out of the factory, you can boot it up and you can start interacting with it. You can deploy payloads, containers, middleware, potentially different kind of kernels. And for that, you need a certain kind of wisdom and that is not in the kernel, right? That is user space, in our opinion. And I mean, in our world, we have put that knowledge, I mean, this kind of minimal thing that offers you the ability to really drive the life cycle of the system into the init RAMFS. And that's it. And yes, what Ahmed is saying, that BSP is firmware 2 is correct, right? So whatever you do, if you design like a BSP, that also you need to allow them to upload the firmware. I mean, but I think those are not really clear distinctions, right? Where does a firmware stop? Where is the kernel part of the firmware? Is it not? But I think if you define firmware as something you cannot change, then obviously the kernel shouldn't be in the firmware, right? For us, but if it's something that is always on every system that you can interact with, that you use to drive your system to run it, then I think we should have at best a kernel and a standardized BSP that is used across all distributions everywhere. Because this is the only way how you can actually make things work. If you have so many different distributions and everybody wants to work with any distribution, with a hardware vendor, maybe some can win because they're the big guys, right? But in the end, you want to get everybody on board to really join, and we need to get a global BSP ecosystem, like a place where BSPs get put out and that every distribution can then consume and make use of. This way you get more power as the small guy by joining ship with all these other distributions, right? So in the end, the BSP becomes like its own mini distro kind of thing world, right? Where people can come together and they ship their BSPs. In the end, BSP becomes like its own mini distro kind of thing world. All right, I think that might be the last question, but is the community BSP problem not fixed with the Yocto OEE meter layers? So in Yocto, I think you can do it, right? You can downstream, you can contribute your layers and it works. But if I'm a man who wants to build a product, I have no way to know what do I choose, what are the qualities, is there somebody putting a stamp on it and telling me, yes, this thing is working with these middlewares and so on. And this is what I think we need to add, right? That somebody really stands in and says, this is a product grade or the best we can come up with BSP that supports X, Y, Z middleware. And there's also an entity maybe behind it, maybe a BSP distribution, maybe the distribution itself, or maybe the vendor of the kernel that says, I'm actually offering support for that and potentially even being able to offer that against pay for products, right? I mean, this is nothing we should shy away from if it helps to build the ecosystem and if it allows small guys to offer something that the big guys are not offering, then, I mean, why not also have a bit of a monetization ability in that thing, right? So it's not pure community, it needs to be product-based BSPs, and it needs to be done in a way that it can be easily consumed, it can be easily updated, people understand what they get and where they get it from. And I haven't seen the big picture on Yocto there yet. I know there you can technically do it, but it still does not help the product builder so much, in my opinion, because all the other questions are left in the open, right? Which middleware is supported? Are there support guarantees? Will it be updated? How long? And so on, right? And having control as a distribution over those kind of quality properties, I think that is the key where distribution can really help out a lot, right? Yocto, Ubuntu, Red Hat, everybody can help on that, putting their certification stamps on it, but trying to get the BSPs in a common place so that we can all share them across distributions. So Ubuntu, Red Hat, everybody can help on that, putting their certification stamps on it, but trying to get the BSPs. Okay. Okay. I hope I answered a few questions for you guys. If there are further questions, I'm happy to chat afterwards and anytime, and have lots of fun for the rest of the day, and see you soon. Bye-bye.